Hey everyone, today I want to talk to you about quite a serious subject. It's something that I work with quite often in my practice. It's about grief, the management of grief, and specifically grief that is related to when someone dies close to us, someone that we have loved and has had an impact on our lives. So there are many models that grief counselors work with. I've found an effective one that I like to work with, and it was from a person named William Borden. He came up with the 4-task model to help people in the grieving process. You see, grieving is a process. It's the mourning process. It's trying to come to terms with the reality of the loss, the consequences that the person must now face, whether that be in life skills and the emotional upheaval that may come from it. So grief is unique to each individual. We all have our unique experience of the grieving process. So nothing is ever clear-cut. When the person will come to me and they are dealing with something like this kind of grief, it's never putting that model exactly how it is for everyone else. It will be tailor-made to the person. So as you are watching this video, it's important to have your own understanding of your process of grief and how these things can apply to you and when. So the first task of grief, task is an interesting word because it's like we must achieve these things, but it's essentially a phase and a process that will be encountered along the way, that is normally encountered along the way. So the first task to working with grief is coming to terms with the reality of what has just happened. And although it's very challenging and it can be a very complicated and confusing time for the individual, there is the sense that something real has happened, that we can't take it back, that life is presenting the person with a very real moment that they must deal with. It can be very challenging to accept that someone has passed, especially if it was sudden, or if it was violent, or if it was due to maybe like a stigmatized process, such as dying from AIDS. Or even if the person has had a very difficult relationship with that loved one. A lot of things can make this part of the process quite challenging. But as the grieving process moves along, there is this need to accept that this is real now. This has actually happened. And a good counselor will ease the person into that moment. It's never throwing something into your face and saying, hey, deal with it. Because it is challenging and it must be used very delicately. But that is task one, to come to terms with the reality of it. And that is essentially why we tend to have funerals. We get to maybe see the loved one in the casket. We have that whole ritual of coming to terms with this has happened. So the second task of working with grief is dealing with the actual emotions that will come up. This can take a lot of time sometimes, but when these emotions do come up, they can be very confusing, and confusion can be one of those emotions. There can be sadness, which is a very normal response, but underneath that sadness there may be resentment, there may be anger towards the loved one who has passed, towards God, towards society, especially if there was violence involved or whatever the case is. But it is essential to start focusing on all the range of emotions that start to come up in this process. So the third task of working with grief is adjusting to the new environment now that your loved one has passed. This tends to fit into 3 categories: external, internal, and spiritual. So the external things are something like having to now maybe pay the bills where your spouse or partner or loved one would pay the bills. very everyday kind of things. You know, maybe your spouse was the one who took the kids to school and got them all ready, and now it is your job to figure this out. Maybe you need to learn to cook, and you know, very practical matters to this new adjustment that you have to experience. The second category is internal adjustment. So maybe your loved one was that person who you would consult with, to lean on sometimes, to share ideas with, to assist with your self-esteem needs, whatever those internal psychological processes are that are now not there, will need adjusting. Who do I now go to? Or is there someone I now go to? How do I now process these internal adjustments without this person? The third category is spiritual. Often this can have a huge impact on your spiritual beliefs. Maybe some people were not spiritual before this, and now they need to find meaning, which can lead them towards spirituality. Or it can go in almost the complete reverse to that, because we can seem as though this is a very unfair act of God. Why would a loving God do something like this to us and to the ones we love? So these will all have to be skillfully dealt with. The beauty is we have the sense of resiliency in us. When we have questions that we can't answer, the brain works in the background to find meaning, to work with these processes. So there is a lot of internal strength in each individual. As broken as we may feel when this is happening, we have this beautiful resiliency that will help us get through this stuff. If on the other hand there are struggles along the way, and I mean real struggles, trying to deal with this kind of stuff, if maybe a year, 2 years, 5 years have gone by and these things are not effectively dealt with, and your normal lifestyle is not coming back, it is essential to seek counseling or some kind of therapy to address these kind of issues. So the fourth task is creating an almost new relationship with your loved one now that they have passed, and allowing yourself to continue with life. People can often feel guilty that, if they stop grieving, they may forget their loved one, or if they find a new spouse or start dating again, they may be letting their spouse down in some way. Sometimes it can be quite tricky to move on from grief, because it can hold us for a long time. It almost keeps us in a certain space, and to then leave that space can be challenging in itself. When our loved ones die, what I do know working with spirits in my sessions is that they want us to live our best life. It is essential that we love them, that's a given, but we must live our lives, and in doing so, we will honor them. Because when we find our happiness, we will connect in the most beautiful way again with them. So yes, that person is not physically with us, but their spirit will remain with us. And in the counseling session, when I have my clients speak to their loved ones encourage them to move forward, to embrace life with all that they have, to seek new opportunities and new adventures and even new activities which they may have held back in the past, which they may not even have considered in the past. This is a new chapter that you are opening up in your life, and it is a beautiful gift that you can give yourself, and a beautiful way of honoring your loved one when you can move into this next phase. We never forget the loved one. They will always be here with us in our heart, and they want us to shine. So like I said in the beginning, this is in no way a linear process that must be task 1, task 2, task 3, and task 4. It can happen either way, whichever way it goes. But it is essential to move with the grieving process, to mourn your loved one, and then to start that next chapter, whenever that may be. I find people who struggle the most with grieving a loved one are those who have no one to reach out to, people with a very poor social support structure, especially people who their loved ones may have died with stigmatized illnesses or difficult circumstances that many other people can't handle or can't understand. In these cases, therefore, it is essential to seek counseling, because a counselor's job is to be open-minded as possible, and to truly hold space for the person as they are going through these grieving moments. There is no allocated time for grieving to be done. It comes to its natural end when the person is ready. So if you are watching this and you are going through that grieving process, my heart goes out to you. I would encourage you to seek some form of support as you go through this process. We are not an island. There are other people who have gone through very similar circumstances who can understand what you are going through. That kind of support is such a beautiful thing to help you in this process. Death is never going to be an easy subject to talk about. But it is here with us. It is a very crucial part of life. Life doesn't exist without death. And we may never find the actual meanings of why we have something called death. But it is important as we go through these experiences, as we grapple the subject of death and the process of grieving and mourning, that we start to understand ourselves better, that we start to have more compassion for ourselves and each other as this goes on, because it will come to us sooner or later. We are heart-centered people, we are emotional people, and that needs some nurturing when we go through these dark moments. So I want to thank you for taking the time for watching this video, and if you still haven't subscribed to my videos, please click below where it says subscribe and the little bell to get the notifications. Thanks, bye bye.